Hello, I've just read Chapter 2 of The Last of the Jedi Against the Empire. We're focusing on Ferus this time, and he's really hurting. We're told that he's struggling to concentrate. He's just filled with so much grief. He just can't focus on things. He thinks he's been, for example, he listens to a conversation, to someone talk for minutes on end, and he thinks he's been listening, and it turns out he hasn't been listening at all. And it says his surroundings didn't seem vivid, and voices seem to come at him from far away. And he thinks he thinks it's not a good situation to be in as a double agent. And he wonders if this is what grief was like, and it says this wasn't sadness like he's felt before when a friend or someone he'd known well had died. It wasn't how he'd felt when he'd learned the fate of all the Jedi. That had been a blow he'd felt keenly, as though he'd been split open. This was worse. And we're reminded about Roan's death, which again brought a tear to my eye. I really didn't want Roan to die. And we learn that he hasn't hated anyone this much before. He hates Vader so much, and we're told that this isn't, and it says it isn't part of what he was. Being trained by Jedi breeds detachment into his bones. But we're told that, of course, he's learned to love once he left the Jedi, and he learned to hate, and in one instance that hate boiled when Vader struck Rome. And again we're reminded that it's amazing he's still alive, how the Emperor had pardoned him, and he's wondering why the Emperor did that. Was it to annoy Vader, or because he had bigger plans? Ferus just doesn't care. No, it says he'd been allowed to walk out of the prison cell. Right now, that was enough. He'd deal with the rest later, and we're told about how he'd offered him training, and Ferus had accepted it because there was only one way he knew his pain would be relieved, and that was if he got revenge on Vader. And it was to take the power Palpatine would teach him and use it against Vader. And we're told that if he had still been a Jedi and spoke with Mace Windu, Yoda, or Obi-Wan about the offer of the Sith Lord, they would have said to not listen, walk away, as he will corrupt him. But it says, but that was the old way. And Ferus thinks that they're all gone now. Not all gone, but the Jedi who were are gone now. And because they believe the Sith didn't have anything to teach them. And he wondered if that wasn't true, and wonders if one could use the teachings of a Sith and still be a Jedi, and gain power and multiply their gifts. And we're told that again, he had not wanted to live, which is something we know of. And he was in that cell, and how his only Palpatine's offer that made him rise, and we're told the only thing that was giving him life at the moment was the possibility of revenge. And how he'd also been given the job he couldn't refuse to hunt down Force sensitives, and it says ex-Senator Sorvo, which is odd because Sorvo was said to still be a senator. He was demoted from his high positions in committees, but he was still a senator because he's a good senator for himself. I think because he's a good senator, he'll vote for what Palpatine needs. So that was that kind of confused me a bit. But we're told the Palpatine had dismissed Sorvo from the task, because he knows it takes the Force sensitive to find a Force sensitive. And again, this is just going to let Ferus find Force sensitives and Jedi. And we're reminded about the base, and now he'd only found one, and we're told that it's as soon as he's sure he'd helped all the Jedi he could, he would retire to the base with them, and it says with the ones who wanted to come, and they would wait there until it was time to strike the Sith. And we're told again how he hasn't had the best of luck. He's only really brought Gavin Mullen, and Solace doesn't want to be a Jedi again. And we're reminded about and we reminded about a couple more things again, about hints of a large-scale operation with no name and a snare operation called Twilight that he suspected was targeting a planet, an organisation, something big. And he has to keep going, and that's confusing me because it said Twilight was the large-scale operation in the last book. So is this is this referring to like the Belarson project that was mentioned in last book? Is it in reference to the Despair thing? I don't know. But he's walking through the Imperial garrison, making his way to the training room, and we're told that Vader's been reassigned to the mountains, because they're building the garrison there because the mountains are proving problematic now. And Ferus is glad that he won't run into Vader, because he doesn't want to run into him again until he's ready. And he goes into a training room, and we learn that he had a meeting with the Emperor that morning. And the Emperor gave him his first lesson and told him there is no lightsaber necessary, and he has to. And he says that it's easier than you think. He says it's easier than you think. Oh, later there will be techniques to study, exercises to complete. But he says for a start, he has to do what he was taught not to do as a Jedi, and give in to his hatred, and let that fuel him. And Ferus walks into the middle of the room, and in order to draw upon that hate, he thinks about the worst memory he has, again, Ronan's death, and he plays it again and again and again in his mind, and how it even says Darth Vader standing, not looking at Roan, not caring, looking at Ferus, killing Roan just to get at him, eliminating a person with blood and bone and memory and laughter and vision and love, just to rile a rival, as a game, as a sport, and the anger starts fueling inside him. And it allows that pain to build up and build up until he screams out, and a brace for an exercise bar breaks off and flies across the room. The exercise, and Ferus opens his eyes and concentrates his gaze on the bar, and it whips from the wall, and it smashes into another wall, and a sizable chunk of the wall breaks off. The room starts getting absolutely destroyed, chairs start flying, smashing into each other, the ceiling starts being ripped apart, and Ferus is feeling a flood of satisfaction. And he thinks that it's not finished yet, and not with his anger or with the room, and he thinks that this room and these objects could be smashed and broken, and if anyone cared and came after him, they would be smashed too, because his anger was just that huge. And the floor begins to crack, and he just keeps giving in and in until all he can see is red, which is said as the colour of destruction. And then an Imperial officer stands in the doorway, and Ferus finally comes back to himself, looks around at the complete destruction of the room. It's completely destroyed, and we're told how he's never been able to do such a thing before. He's panting, and we're told the dark side of the Force has entered him, and the pleasure he's feeling is frightening. And we're told it's frightening and satisfying. And he gives the officer a look of contempt, and the officer scurries back in fear, and Ferus enjoys the fear. And we're told that this is the first time since Roan's death that he hasn't felt any pain. Ferus is just hurting so much. I know I really want to see, I know as Cap saying I really wanted to see more of Roan and Ferus together. Not just in like a general sense, not doing stuff like this, just, doing their business in like a day-to-day life situation rather than this whole resistance thing. But even without that, you really do feel for Ferus. You really feel Ferus's pain. You really understand it. Again, you just want to give him a big old hug, tell him everything's okay. But it's interesting how he's sort of did derive pleasure from all that hatred and pain, which I wasn't really expecting. Again, I know like the dark side corrupts, but I was hoping for maybe a bit more of a smoother transition. I know Ferus has like dabbled with, but what does no attachments mean? Like in the past, that was a thing in the last book. But I do find it quite interesting how he took pleasure from the fear of the officer. But also, the more you think about it, the more it kind of makes sense. The Empire, they've taken so much from Ferus. They took away Jedi the Jedi from him. Even though he left them, he still has a bit of a connection to them. They took away Roan. He's losing everything, and they're gaining everything. And I think to him, the fear that they're feeling is pleasurable to him because he's finally not the one who is being oppressed now. He's intending to use his power to oppress the Empire, and I think that's why he's deriving satisfaction and pleasure from it. It's quite an interesting thing, and it was something where it was, oh, okay, I wasn't quite expecting that, but the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. Also, what happened to Amy Anson? Is she okay? Like, she wasn't mentioned at all in the last chapter of the last book. It was just all about Ferus. Amy isn't mentioned in this chapter. I wasn't expecting her to be mentioned in the first chapter because that was about Trevor. But, it's, where's Amy? What's happened to Amy Anson? Poor Amy. Hopefully she gets mentioned or appears later and we find out what's happened with her, but yeah. Sorry, I've just paused the recording, I'm back now. I also find it quite interesting about Ferus's belief of he can use the Sith teachings to empower himself and still be a Jedi. That kind of leans into the whole grey Jedi idea, I guess. Which I know a lot of people do not like that idea. I personally do enjoy that idea. I think it is a good idea because it's Light and Dark is more of a division rather than a fact. It's nothing's in reality. Nature does not decree it's good or bad. That's just something we made up. And like the light and dark sides in Star Wars are that, that they are just divisions made by the characters. So at least in my opinion, the reason why the dark side corrupts is mainly out of belief that it corrupts rather than it actually being corrupted. But again, that's just my opinion. But yeah, we know what's going to happen. Ferus he's going to he's going to go down that well of the dark side. He's going to struggle to come back up from that if he does. So it's going to be interesting to see where this all is and what Trevor is going to think of all this as well. I think out of all the characters, he's going to be the most horrified at Ferus joining the dark side. He's already had his doubts. It's just that Roan's eye. If he sees Ferus like that, he's barely hanging on as it is. He's going to be torn. He's going to be completely ripped in two, I think, if he sees Ferus on the dark side. I think Solace, she's probably going to be a lot more understanding. Solace is quite, I guess, grey Jedi-esque as it is. She's not really a Jedi, and she does lean a bit more into what feels like the dark side. Yet she's still quite in the light side doctrines. So it's going to be interesting to see how the other characters react to Ferus leaning into the dark side. So yeah. I don't really have anything else to say. Next chapter seems to be focusing on Flame, and I assume that's going to also focus on the Obeys as well, because she's with them. So yeah. Anyway, that brings an end to this review of Last of the Jedi against the Empire. The Last of the Jedi, sorry. So, thank you all for watching. And you know what I'm going to say. Goodbye. Hello, I've just read chapter 3 of The Last of the Jedi against the Empire. So, this does feature Flame, like I said it would, but it doesn't feature the Obeys. As it turns out, Flame is on Belasa, not on Coruscant, so I suppose he's just travelled to Belasa between the books. Now back to Belasa. So she's pacing back and forth in the front room of the 11's safe house, and we saw that time's running out for her on this mission. She's already connected many resistance leaders into her movement. From significant core and metering planets and their inner movement, and we're told that the reason why she hasn't focused on the Outer Rim is because it's too unsettled and too insignificant to worry about at the moment. And we're told that what she really needs is Belasa, and of course it's been made very clear in these books that Belasa is the symbol of resistance in the galaxy at the moment. That's why she needs it. If Belasa joins her, you know, everyone's going to pretty much trust Moonstrike. She's going to have, I guess, the most resistance, whatever, you know what I mean, resistance in there. And we're told that even if it became fractured here, it could rise again in a heartbeat, and we talked about these weights, symbolic weights of the Belasan resistance, and how it will keep the other resistances close. We told Belasa first, then Coruscant, and then we told Moonstrike would be complete, and her job will be done, and she will have linked the resistance movements of the most important planetary systems in the galaxy. And we're told that no one thought that could be done, but she's almost done it. And we're told about how she had come a long way from Mako, and how only a few years ago she thought that the Clone Wars wouldn't touch her, and that she thought she'd be in her comfortable life forever, and she hasn't been able to imagine her world getting destroyed, and her wealth being in danger, and her family being dead, losing so much, and that she's had to remake herself and become a warrior. And we're told how she's had to use all her cunning and will to do it, and it says she's succeeded, but you know, she's almost succeeded. And we're told how the one important mission and thing in her life at now is the only important thing is her mission. And we're told if the people here didn't mess up the whole thing. And we're told that the sticking point is Belasa, because, again, since Throne lands in the US of Amianton, Will has grown silent. It didn't click for me when I was reading the last book, The Secret Weapon. And I think it was chapter 17, when they come across all the toxin weapons, etc. It didn't click for me that they were working on transporting those weapons for some reason, even though it's plainly there in the text. It just didn't click for me. And we're told, because it says Trevor had smuggled out information that the Empire was building a toxic weapons delivery system on Usa. That's what it was, but it just didn't click for me for some reason. I have no idea why it didn't click for me, but it just didn't until it was said that it was a toxic weapons delivery system here in the book. So in this book, so again, I don't know why it didn't click for me, because you know they did mention the toxins, they mentioned the weapons delivery. You know, it just didn't click for me for some reason. And we're told that the 11 have sent the information out into the city and have been highlighted on their holoprint news, and how it has spread from citizen to, and the news was spread from citizen to citizen, and the Houstons were absolutely livid, and there have been some protests, and they were told that 2 days ago they had all stayed in their homes and refused to work, and the city shut down, and the city and the streets, the LAs were just eerily empty, and for Flame, it was just an example of how it was just a lesson of how amazing resistance can be. And we're told that the imperial governor of Balasa retaliated by getting all the children in the Bluestone district and putting them in the garrison jail, and threatened to move them off planet to an imperial prison, and then move to the next district and do the same, and do it over and over again. And the Houstons went back to work afterwards, and this pretty much just proved to the Houstons that just the lengths the Empire were willing to go. And we're told that they set up more checkpoints on the streets, and if a Houston was caught without ID docs, they were immediately taken to the garrison prison. And Flame keeps hearing the murmurs of voices between Donor and Will in the main room. It says something was brewing, but she didn't know what because Will wasn't talking. Okay, never mind her. But Donor had arrived, and they had been in that room for over an hour now. And she's just wondering when the 11 will let her in, but let them into their confidence, because she just can't keep spending time here needing to get Balasa. She has other worlds she needs to bring into Moonstrike. She just can't keep staying here. And all the discussions were being held in security doors with her on the other side. And again, reminded, this is the main problem with Moonstrike. It's trust, because she says, of course, she understood that the members of any resistance group will be wary, and they have to be. And she has usually overcome that distrust by funding their movements, or taking the same risks as them, or being involved in their covert operations. And group after group started to trust her, but the 11's just harder to crack. Flames then sees an alarm light go on, and she knows Will's, and she looks out a window, and she knows Will's doing it, and it's Ferus Solon. And Flame looks at Solon for a moment, and we're told that Will, who is paler than ever since Amianton was captured, which again, I don't know if I think I mentioned it. I mentioned it. I think I mentioned it quite late. After it was first brought up. But Will has some feelings for Amianton. But it's all that even though Will was very expressive about how he felt, going very pale, Ferus pretty much left all that pain bottled up inside him with Roan's death. But she'd heard from Donor just how destroyed he'd been by Roan's death. And again, we're reminded about how Flame's sceptical about Ferus. And she just doesn't know why the Resistance keeps trusting Ferus. And she thinks how no one's incorruptible. Ferus is let in. And Ferus tells Will that Ami's alive and that she's being transferred. And Will is incredibly relieved, and he says that they can, if they go inside, they can talk. And Flame, this is her moment. She puts her foot down and says no, she can't keep staying and wasting her time here. And that she needs Balasa for Moonstrike, and she says if they don't trust her, she can't stay. She has other planets, other systems she needs to get to and contact and get to join her. And she sees the hesitancy on Ferus and Will's face, and she's not sure whether she should push it because she doesn't want to lose their trust. And she wasn't willing to lose Balasa, but they had to think she was. and she tries to convince them, saying that she can help them, and they know she can help them. And she says that without her, their resistance will wither and die, and now there's a moment to make their decision, because if not, she's going to be gone, and she doesn't have any more time to give them. And she can see that Will is doubtful, but Ferus is completely hiding his feelings, and she knows that Ferus is the one who has the most to lose, because she can expose him being a double agent to the Empire. And they didn't trust each other, but she knows Ferus is the one she has to win over, and even though they don't trust each other, they have to find common ground, otherwise Moonstrike will fall apart. And Ferus says to not go. Let him and Will talk first, and then they can go and call it, and then they can call her in. And from that moment on, she knows they would accept her even if they didn't. At that moment, and she inclines her head, and she's flooded with relief, but she doesn't express it. She doesn't show it. And they go in, and Will asks about how Amy is. Ferus says that she hasn't been tortured, but they're transferring her off planet to a prison world. And Donor rises from a seat and says they can't let that happen, and Ferus agrees that they can't. And he says that she won't survive there. And also, you've got to remember her son, Adam, which is it? Adem? It's Adem. He hasn't been mentioned since the first book. He was mentioned once in the first book, but that's her son, her 10-year-old son. Maybe 11 now. Yeah, so what about poor Adam? And Will asks about Flame, and asks if they should involve her. And Ferus says that she's right, she's just wasting her time if they don't let her inside the 11. And he says that what she's offering that can help them, especially now. And Will asks what he means. And Ferus says that if they're going to have any effective resistance on Belasa, they have to ensure the safety of the children. And Donor asks about evacuation. And Ferus says that it might come to that, but they couldn't pull off that kind of operation without help. And Donor thinks that he's thinking that Donor is thinking of including Flame, and that she might be the help. And Ferus says that they should give her a test. They'll come up with a plan to save Amy, but they won't let her in on the details. That way Amy is safe, and they can benefit from Flame's expertise. As he mentions, she's an incredible pilot. And Will asks about his plan, and Ferus says he doesn't exactly have a plan, but just some ideas. And he's got the transfer points and the time, and he says that they have 2 days. And Will frowns and knows so that's not a lot of time to plan, and he doesn't want to endanger Amy and thinks they should attack from the air. And Ferus says no, they can't attack from the air. That's what they're going to be expecting. They won't, because they're saying how he explains that the crackdown has shut down the city, and they won't imagine they'll be able to pull it off, I assume, from the ground. And Donor says that then we do it here, and Will asks how, where is the transfer point, and Ferus explains that they're using using one of the Imperial landing platforms outside the hangar on the outskirts of the city, and that hangar is restricted to high priority traffic. And they have to rescue her there and then take her through Usa and back to the safe house, because he doesn't think they can take her off planet. He doesn't think they can risk that. Will thinks that's an insane idea, taking her throughout the city because of the amount of checkpoints there are. And Ferus says he knows exactly how many checkpoints there are that they would have to get through, and they can use some of the safe passages the 11 have worked on. And Will says that they aren't complete, and Ferus mentions the tunnel underneath the lake, and Will says it's not complete either. Ferus tells him that they'll have to work on it then, and again they only have 2 days, and he says it's going to have to be ready in 2 days, and that's in the meantime, they have to get a strike force together, and Will says some of his best operatives are in the mountains. It's going to take some time. And Ferus says not to worry about the strike force because he's already got a strike force coming, which I assume is, of course, erased. You understand why I'm a little bit, again, skeptical of Flame. I've mentioned why in the back in my Return of the Dark Sun review. I spoiled myself with Toma and Flame. Well, maybe just Flame. I don't know about Toma, but I won't bring it up here in case it does wind up being true. If you want to really know, you can go back into those reviews. But you understand why Flame, she can't keep staying, she can't keep waiting, you know, she needs to connect to the resistances. You know, she's got the main resistances I think she wants. That's what I think that's what she means by she only needs Balasta and Coruscant, yet she needs to go to other planets and other systems. I think that's what she means. You know, she's got the main resistances she needs. You know, she's got, I don't know what she's got. We haven't really gone deep into that. But you know, she's been able to connect many of them, and she needs to. But she still needs to connect. You know, like Coruscant and Balasta. Those are the main ones, and then you have, of course, have the smaller resistances. Which I assume that's what she's referring to. So you understand why she just can't keep staying. I'm curious as to what they mean by not letting her into the details, and that will be to the benefit of Ami's safety. You know, that kind of confuses me a little bit. But yeah. What else? What else can I talk about? Again, they got Will's concern for Amy, and it's sweet how they're getting together, and how he has so much care for her as well. It's very sweet. It does feel a bit strange how Adam, whatever it is, how he's not been mentioned since Desperate Mission. You know, he's mentioned in the Desperate Mission as by Malorum, saying that you have a 10-year-old, you have a son, Adamantine, he's STEM, I believe, and he walks himself to school. How pathetic or something like that. And Amy says that only cowards threaten children, you know, or something along the lines of that. So, you know, like, what about Adam, you know? We've completely forgotten about Adam. Is he with his father or grandparents? You know, it's where is he? And I know he doesn't get mentioned again in these books. At least Wikipedia says it doesn't. So I don't know where Adam is. I don't know where he is. Hopefully he's okay though, and yeah. Again, I assume the strike force Ferus is referring to is, of course, Solus, Strike out the other arrays members like Keats and Cohen. I'm going to be interested to see whether Orion is still involved here. Because if you remember at the end of the last book, you know, Orion appeared out of nowhere, you know, with no explanation. And he's quite involved in the conversation as well at the end, and it's like, hey, where did Orion come from? You know, at least, you know, his lines, you know, they can be transferred to other characters. So it's like not like the worst bit, but if he gets mentioned here and starts doing stuff here, this is going to be a bit problematic. Because he's meant to be on the asteroid. It's meant to be left on the asteroid. Actually, I need to check. Okay, it doesn't even get. Okay, it's not going to appear in this book. It doesn't even get a mention. Okay, so it looks like That was just a mistake. I've just checked his Wikipedia page. Yeah, it just says secret weapon, then skips against the Empire and goes straight to Master of Deception as his mention. As his next appearance as a mention. Okay, so that's quite interesting. So I guess he's not involved then. But yeah, it's quite interesting. It's funny how Orion was just involved in that chapter though, at the end of the last book. But yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how they get Ami out though. Ami out. So yeah. So far I'm quite enjoying the book. Next chapter seems to be focusing on, of course, Solus, Rygao, Clive, maybe even other members of the Arrays. It just says Solus, Rygao and Clive, and it says they're in the Tanglewood, so yeah. I'm not sure whether Astri, I assume not Astri, because again, you know, it may be a bit too dangerous for her, but yeah, I don't know whether Keats, Coven, Dex will appear in there. Maybe Astri will, maybe not. We'll see. We'll see. I think that's it that I have to say for this chapter. So yeah. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I have just read chapter 4, that's chapter 3, chapter 4 of The Last of the Jedi Against the Empire. So Rygao, Solus and Clive are going through I've gone through the holographic portal thing, the hologram of in the Tangle Woods, if you remember from the last book. And they're on Balasa, and we're told they're taken off within the hour that Ferus had contacted them. And Solus looks at Rygao, and we learn that Rygao is the quietest being she's ever met. And even though she's no chatterbox, you know, he's just incredibly silent. And we're told that he told his story briefly to them. After that, he has rarely ever spoke, or even just venturing an opinion or observation. And Solus isn't minding the quiet, but it's driving Clive crazy, and we're told if she had a sense of humour, she'd find it funny, but she doesn't have time or the temperament to be amused. And Clive says, "Hey mates, we had to dodge 10 Imperial patrols and a buzz droid or two, but looks like we made it. I say woo, glad to be here. Don't all speak at once." And Solus says to look out for the landing site, and that she has the rough coordinates, but they have to keep changing it, but the 11 have to keep changing it in case of being, just for the safety, and they need a visual, and Rygao points out and says there, and Clive goes, "He speaks!" And they land, and they come out of the cockpit, and that's when Ferus walks up, and we're reminded about how their meetings are infrequent now that he's a double agent. And Solus feels there's something off. Well, at first she feels a rush of gladness at seeing him, and she's wondering if she's actually starting to grow fond of Ferus. And as they walk to him, she starts to feel unease. She feels that something is off. Something's wrong, and Ferus nods at Rygao and says he was overwhelmed when Solus told him that he was alive, and he continues saying that every Jedi's a gift and to find someone he knew and someone he mourned, and he starts tearing up, and Rygao says, "I remember you well, you were never this emotional." And Ferus explains that he says he's changed, and Rygao says we all have changed, and it's all this is the most Rygao has spoken in more than a day. and Solace apologises about Roan's death, and she tries to comfort him by saying that he's one with the Force now, and Clive says that he was one of the best and that the galaxy is diminished. And Ferus doesn't acknowledge their comments, and it's uneasy Solace because the Ferus she knows would have said something whether it was agreeing or sharing how he was feeling, and Ferus very quickly changes the subject back to Rygal, and asks how they couldn't risk a long communication back on when they were back on Coruscant, and he asks how he escaped. And Rygal explains that he was on a mission that only Yoda and Mace, even though last book is just Yoda, sorry, but both only Yoda and Mace knew about, and he was undercover, not travelling as a Jedi. Some scientists took him, a man and a wife, and they disappeared, and he's been looking for them, and he says their names, Tobin Ganter and Nina Nautri. And Ferus explains that, but Nina Nautri is here, and that she's one of the scientists in the factories, under duress, as he says, being under pressure, and we told how she was the one who escaped, who help Trevor escape, and when Amy was captured, and he then goes and pauses, he stops, and he swallows, and sort of realises he can't even say Roan's name. And Rygal asks if they can get Lina out, and Ferus says he doesn't know. He doesn't know what pressure Vader's putting on her, but that he can try to talk to her. And Rygal exhales, and he's glad that she hasn't been sent to an Imperial prison, as he feared. And he found out that he explains that he found out other scientists had disappeared. And Ferus explains that the Empire's recruited them for big projects that only Palpatine, Vader, and maybe Tarkin know about. Well, know the extent of, really. And he says they're doing research and building something big, and he throws out a theory that they're prefabricating a city or something like that, but it's not like that, and it's on the scale of that. And he says it sounds crazy. And Soros moves the subject to Amy, and she pushes away her uneasiness. And she's wondering what it was, you know. She's wondering if it was something in Ferus's eyes, or some disturbance in the Force, or about the way he wasn't really looking at her. But Ferus says that they'll talk about how they'll get Amy out once they get into the city. And he says that the 11 have sent a team to complete a tunnel under the lake near the landing platform, and they'll have supplies on their side. And he can't tell them much, and he says, I can't tell you how much I wish I could go on this mission with you. And Solace briskly says nonsense, and that he's too deep into the Imperial territory now, and they can't risk him losing out, and they can't risk him pulling out just for this. And Ferus explains he's scheduled to meet with Hydra, the head Inquisitor on Coruscant. And this took me a bit by surprise, because the head is capitalised. Every time head Inquisitor has been used in these books so far, it hasn't been capitalised. So that took me by surprise. And this is the first time it's actually been capitalised. But anyway, Ferus says that he's scheduled to meet with Hydra on Coruscant, and he'll have access to a list of possible Jedi, and that means they can find others. And he says in any case he'll be far away when the plan is executed. And Clive says Vader will try to blame him anyway. And he says, but then again, and he says he's nasty that way, and Clive has a bit of sorrow in his eyes, and he says, but you are well acquainted with his ruthlessness. And again, it's the second acknowledgement Clive has made about Roan's death and Ferus's pain, and Solace was expecting Ferus to turn to Clive and to let him know in a word or gesture that he had heard it, but he didn't. And instead she just feels a tremor in the Force coming from the name of Vader. And it's surrounding Ferus, and it came from, and Vader's name had caused the tremor. The tremor? The tremor. and Ferus ignores it, ignores it, and says that they can use his transport to enter the city, and that his vehicle has automatic clearance through the checkpoints. And Clive says it's too bad they can't use that in the rescue operation, and Ferus explains that it wouldn't be much use anyway because all automatic clearances are disabled when an attack happens. So they wouldn't get far anyway. And he says that they got them covered another way. And he says they got the checkpoints covered another way. And Solus asks more out of to see how Ferus reacts rather than an actual answer. She asks if he's seen Vader since he was released from the holding cell. And Ferus's face tightens, and he says he explains that he left the garrison for the mountains. And Solus feels it again, the dark side of the Force. And it's touching Ferus like a shadow, and she wants to warn him to beware, but she knows this isn't the time or place. And Ferus explains he has to return to the garrison, and he'll drop them near the safe house, and doesn't want to bring an Imperial vehicle too close to it. And it says, he was lying, she knew it. She didn't know why. Perhaps it was a harmless untruth, but Ferus had never told her a lie before. And they get into the transport and make their way into the city. And he drops Solus, Clive and Weigall at a deserted corner near the safe house. Of course, not at the safe house, but near. And Solus says to Ferus that may the Force be with him, and she puts layers behind her words, layers of meaning, and Ferus says that he'll see them on Coruscant, and he turns away from her concern, and he heads off. And Clive says he'll scout around and make sure they weren't followed before they head to the safe house. And Clive walks off, and once Clive's left, Weigall speaks and says, "Are you sure of Ferus?" And Solus would have said that yesterday she would have said yes. But she feels it too, that something has happened to him since Rome died, and the Emperor released him from that cell even after he attacked Vader. And Weigall says that he felt the vibration of the dark side, just a vibration and nothing more. And Solus says that they've all been tempted by anger, in that he's lost his partner, Ro, who is of course closer to him than anyone else. And Weigall says, so he's struggling with grief. The danger, of course, is if his grief turns to anger. And Solus is quite confident that his better nature will win, and she says the Force is strong in Ferus, and he will remember the Jedi way. And I assume it's sunset as the shadows are extending around them. And Weigall says it's a new galaxy, and he keeps saying that. And Solus is starting to understand that it's a typical remark of Gal. But while it seemed to be only a observation, it says so much more. And I'll just read this last little bit out. In this new galaxy controlled by the Empire, shadows were deeper. There were caverns to fall into. Very deep holes, treacherous places where even the best of beings could become lost. People could turn. No wonder when they saw each other they spoke so much of being changed. They had changed, and kept on changing. They were hard and getting harder. Their rage and sorrow could tip them into a place the dark side of the Force could reach. And Solus says to herself, not Ferus, it will never happen to Ferus. And that's where we end off the chapter. I honestly wasn't really noticing Ferus's change until Solus was bringing it up. And the more you think about it, the more it's... You would have a little remark there. And I think it's mainly because we've seen it from his perspective, you know. Whereas Solus's, the last time she saw Ferus was Was it back in Tangled Web? No way it was that long ago. I think it was actually back in Tangled Web they last met each other. Where he, of course, when they were escaping the Fountain Towers. I think that was the last time they saw each other. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly sure that's the case. So, you know, that's quite the so for Solos, you know, that change is going to be a lot more noticeable than it is like to us the reader, because we've seen the transition. But yeah, you know, Ferus is just so devastated by Rowan's stuff. It looks like the next chapter is going to focus on Ferus, so you really just feel sorry for Ferus. You really do. What else? Again, it did take me off guard with Head Inquisitor being capitalised, the head by a bit, but yeah. What else? What else is there? I'm not sure if I have anything else to say in this chapter. I guess Clive saying at the start, like, we made it through an Imperial patrol and a couple of buzz droids, but we're doing okay, or something like that. Something along the lines of that, you know, that was a funny line. Yeah, I'm not sure if I have anything else to say. I'm struggling to think of things to say in this chapter. Because a lot of the chapter can pretty much just be summarised in Ferus is different. And Ferus is struggling, you know, that pretty much summarises the whole chapter, really. So it's tough to say anything specific. It's going to be interesting to see how Lin and Nautri gets more involved again. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I did spoil myself on Lin and Nautri's involvement. I think it was, I was looking through because the start of these books, since last book, they have a little guide to characters section. And in the guide to characters, there are Ferus Solan's friends and allies, and in there is Lin and Nautri, and it says medical expert who helped Trevor escape. So I googled her, and it turns out she was the one to help Trevor escape. Of course, I don't know if she dies or not. Made sure to only check appearances, but yeah. Yeah, I don't have anything else to say really. I don't have much else to say. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I have just read chapter 5 of The Last of the Jedi Against the Empire, and this is an emotional chapter. So we learn that Ferus had felt Solus's unease, and he thinks he should have been better at concealment, and he thinks Palpatine must have been a master at concealment. Given he's being able to fool an entire Senate and the Jedi Council. And he's thinking he'll have to learn how to do that, how to conceal that. And he's thinking about, and he told how the memory of what he had done at the garrison weighs heavily on him, and he was afraid that Solus would pick it up, and she has. And we learn that he had to lie to her, and that he wasn't going back to the garrison, but was because he couldn't bear to say Rowan's name in front of them, but he was instead going to Rowan's family. And that was the one thing he has to do before he leaves Belarus, of course, onto Hydra, you know. And we're reminded about how they have been his family too. And when Ferus arrived on Belarus, he had been friendless and alone, and in the Jedi Temple there had been plenty of contemplation and solitude, but you always felt you were surrounded by life. And the energy of the place, and you felt connected. But on the last, it just felt like gravity was turned off, and he felt very alone. And then Rome befriended him, um, and he finally felt like he was connecting to things again. And he brought him home. And Ferus is careful to leave his speeder not close to the family, because of course they've moved to a different home now, and they're now under another name, because it's too risky for them to reveal that they're connected to Roan. And we saw that Roan has restricted his visits in the last year, and Ferus hasn't seen them at all. And Ferus is standing at the front door, and then Roan's mother, Enna, opens, and tears are glittering in her eyes, and she says, "Ferus, you came." Ferus steps into her embrace and says he had to, and she brings him in and thanks him, and he follows her into the main room, and Roan's father, Alexia, Alexir, and when he thanks Roan for coming, not Roan, Ferus for coming, I'm getting all mixed up here. And Ferus is feeling a bit disorientated because he feels like he's a bit clumsy at the moment, stumbling about the room to greet each family member and close friends. And we're told they're in the Belasan tradition of the 9-day mourning, where no one would leave Alexia and Enna's house until the 9 days were up, and then the group would rotate visits for 9 weeks. And we're told that Ferus had even participated in the tradition when Roan's beloved aunt, Lilia, Lilia, Lilia. I'm gonna go with Lilia. Maybe it's Lila, but I'm gonna go with Lilia. When his beloved aunt Lilia passed, and that was 3 years before. And Ferus sits next to Enna. Again, his tradition for the latest person who's arrived to sit next to the mother. And Enna says that now the family's complete, and Alexia Alexia says that they only know he died at the garrison, and asks Ferus to tell him what happened. And Ferus is a little bit, and we're told that this is what Ferus came for, and he couldn't find the words, and Enna reassures him and looks him in the eyes and says that you must tell us everything. And Ferus thinks that they're going to blame him, and that he owed them the truth, and that was why he was here, and why he'd been afraid to come. And he explains that Rome volunteered for the mission. They broke into the factory, and to find out what they're really doing. And they were discovered, and Darth Vader appeared, and he said he arrived and tried to make it, and he thought Vader would assume he was on his side, and he says, I am working for the Empire now, at least it appears that way. And Enno explains that Roan had told them everything on his last visit, and that they never once for a second thought he was actually with the Empire, which I think that's quite sweet. I was thinking, are they not going to be accepting of Ferus because they think he's on the Empire? But no, Roan's cleared that all up for them. Anyway, Ferus then clears his throat, and he just doesn't feel worthy of the trust and affection in this room, and he feels like it should be Roan who's here, and he feels like a poor substitute for their son. And he's thinking how, yes, they were so kind and would die before they let him feel it. And he's talking to Vader, and he explains how he was talking to Vader, trying to persuade him to bring Roan and Ami into his care. And he was then mid-sentence in the middle of a word, and that's when Vader struck. And Enna flinches, and Ferus stops. And Ferus explains how he knelt with him, and his last message to him was to stay silent and not to avenge him, and his last thought was not for himself. And he feels Enna's deep shoulder, and she says, I should have known Vader would... And no, Ferus says he should have known Vader would strike, and Alexia assures him that he couldn't have known. And Enna says she's glad that he was with him, and that Rome would have wanted him to be with him, and that will comfort her always. Which this is such a heartbreaking and sweet chapter. And they do, and of course they don't blame him, and they include him in their sorrow. But Ferus felt like he might break down, so he got up and leaves the room and goes into the kitchen. And the dishes are covered and lined on the counters, and we're told the larder is full, and the food was brought to the grieving relatives, and it's another custom throughout the galaxy. And Ferus just wonders what purpose does that custom serve, because it was a ritual for the givers, at least that's what he imagines, and not those who sat with their grief hour after hour, and he thinks how nothing would help them. And he just thinks about how he's brought nothing but the details of their own death to the house, and he would think how he'd walk away from this and know that he was responsible for Roan's death. And of course, they had told him that he couldn't have anticipated Vader's move, but he thinks that they don't understand what it means to be a Jedi, what Jedi training is. He should have anticipated it in his mind. And Ferus slams his fists on the counter, and a voice behind him shouts, "Don't break Enna's dishes, you know how she feels about them." And Ferus turns around, needing to recognise it having to take a moment to recognise it. And it's Roan's first cousin, Mallory. And she says, "It's me, a little change from when you last saw me." And we learn that she was the daughter of Leela, whatever it was. As Ferus looks at her, something reminds him of Roan, and a fresh pain slices through him, and she says she's sorry about Roan, she doesn't have any words for him, and that there are none. And the simple words touch Ferus, and he wants to turn away and hide it, but he doesn't, and he just says, "I know." And Mallory starts making some tea, and Ferus asks what Mallory's been up to for the past few years, and she explains she was a med student on Coruscant and got through all her training during the Clone Wars, and she trained at Champal, and we're told that Champal was a hospital facility in Galactic City, and that it was renowned as one of the best in the galaxy. And she explains that then the Emperor took over. And at first it wasn't so bad, but now they're calling it Empal Su Recon, Emperor's Surgical Reconstruction Centre. I like that though, Empal. I like Emperor Palpatine. I know that's probably not what it's meant to be, but still. And they started turning away non-human patients, and the best doctors started leaving, and personnel, and they recruited others. And when she finished her training, they offered her a job, but she said no, and she says she won't work for the Empire, so she came back home, and she feels she's more needed here anyway. She said that she's not needed here anyway. And she places the teapots and mugs on a tray, and we're told that Ferus had been half listening, because something had pinned in him in the clutter of words. And in the last book, at the end of the last book, Palpatine was saying that, yes, you can become more powerful than Vader. I created him, did I not? And the words "I created him" are pinging around in his head. Ferus is thinking about Vader's armour and breath mask and helmet, and he wonders if Vader had received those prosthetics at the Emperor's pet project, as it says. And as Mallory hoists the tray, Ferus asks her to wait. And Mallory asks if she would like some tea, and Ferus says no, but he says he's like her help. And Mallory says, "Name it, your family." And Ferus says, "I need you to take that job at Empal." And Mallory just says, "Ferus, ask me anything, but don't ask me to do that." And Ferus explains that it's about avenging Roan's death. And she's put down the tray, and she's gazing at Ferus and reading him for a moment, and she takes a breath, and the last line is, "Then I'm in." And that's how we end the chapter. You really feel the grief in this chapter. You really feel the grief. You really just feel it. It's a very well written chapter. You really just feel the grief from Ferus and the family. Ferus and the fam. Oh, it's heart-wrenching. I was tearing up reading it. Oh, again, it's so well written, this chapter. You really just feel the grief. Um, you still got a little bit of the humour in there that these books do really well. You're like, like Mallory saying, "Don't break Henna's tissues. You know how she feels about them." Um, and I think that could have maybe been and I think that could have been a interruption in the flow of the chapter, but the chapter started it started, it became a little bit, it sort of lightening up a little bit as it went on, as it focused a bit more on Mallory rather than the grief. And I think, even though it was a little bit of of I think it would have been much more of an interruption, and I kind of spoiled would have probably spoiled the flow more if it hadn't been if it was stayed on the grief, but it didn't. It went on to Mallory, and even though there was like the odd mention of Roan's death there, here and there, it was for the most part about Mallory. Um, I'm going to be interested to see what Ferus is scheming up. Is he is he going to learn about like what Vader's prosthetics are, and use that to use that knowledge to try and disable those prosthetics? It's going to be interesting to see what he's scheming up. I think that's what's probably going to happen, but yeah. Next chapter seems to be focusing on Jenna Zanarbor. I was going to say Janna Bellard, but no, that's an Inquisitor from Star Wars Galaxies. Was an Inquisitor. She's a skeleton now, but she's dead now. But yeah, next chapter is going to have Jenna Zanarbor, who was of course mentioned in the last book. As I think one of the ones that I think she was one of the ones that that she was involved with the transport of the toxic weapons. So yeah. I know I think I know she was in Jedi Quest. I don't know if she was in Jedi Apprentice. So this isn't a bit like Sano Solo and Bog Davinian. This isn't like the biggest like whoa Jenna, who is here? It's a bit. I have no idea who she was until it was brought up, until Ferus brought her up in the last chapter. So this is going to be This is going to be interesting to see who she is, and what she's about. So yeah. I think that brings an end to this review. Again, you really just feel the grief in this chapter, and the thing is, Ferus is blaming himself so much. He's blaming himself so much, but he wasn't able to anticipate it, and he hasn't been a Jedi for years, and it's only been like a month or two, about a month and a few weeks, since he started training as a Jedi again. He can't expect to get it right this quickly, yet he's still struggling, and you can't see that, and you really just feel for Ferus. You really do feel. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read chapter 6 of The Last of the Jedi Against the Empire. Now, I want to apologise now that if I get one of the characters' names wrong, specifically Jenna Zanarbor, and if I accidentally say Jenna Zanarbor, sorry, and if I accidentally say Janna Bellard, I'm meaning Jenna Zanarbor. Bellard is an Inquisitor, and because they have similar names, Janna, Jenna, I'm probably going to get them mixed up, and they have three names, Jenna Zanarbor, Janna Bellard, I'm probably going to get them mixed up, so just warning you here and now. So It's just so you know, if I say Bellard, I'm talking about Zen Arbor. So, Vader is at a hangar in the mountains, and he's waiting for Jenna, who's making him wait as some kind of ploy. And he thinks how irritable it is when beings thought they could manipulate him, and he thinks that she'll learn, and yeah, and we're told that he had come down to the hangar as a mark of respect he didn't have, but wanted to demonstrate, and that the ship had landed. I assume Jenna's ship, but she had not emerged, and he thought that Jenna would be more mindful of the respect he had, of the respect owed to him. Not to mention that she was hoping to land a contract with the Empire. Probably not the best idea to make it to make it Supreme Commander wait. But what Jenna doesn't know is that Vader needs her more than she needs him, which is why he's still standing there. And we're told how many of the officers and stormtroopers were not happy about moving to the mountains and leaving the relative comforts of USA. And how the locals in the mountains, they sometimes set up traps for their air speeders or obscure trails. Vader just ignores the complaints, and we learn that the mountains became a refuge for the 11, and there are hundreds of resistors hiding there, and the place has to be purged. And he's a second away from leaving when Jenna finally appears at the top of the ramp, and she just stands there pausing for effect, and he's thinking, is he supposed to admire her? Is he supposed to... He supposed she had been beautiful in her day, but that was long ago. Surgeries and treatments had kept her skin smooth and tight, but she was a human woman after all. And we're told about how the life she's lived probably doesn't show on the outside, but the corruption inside her is still evident. And then he hears Padme's voice saying, "And what will you look like 20 years on?" And he thinks now he has to banish that voice forever. And we're told how it's the voice he hears in the middle of the night, awake and sleeping, and it's what pushed him from his uneasy rest, and usually led him to stalk the confines of the garrison, and check in on those who were working the night shifts, and became the bane of the night shift. And it's what we learn. That's why Ferus has grown from a nuisance, a petty nuisance, to just a problem. Because it wasn't necessarily Ferus, but again, what he represents, how he reminds Vader of his past as Anakin. And how we learn that, and before Ferus came back, thought of Anakin as an entirely different person entirely. And we learn that he derived so much pleasure from killing Rome, and he hasn't planned it, but the opportunity presented itself, and he took it. And to him, it was the perfect solution. And he had taken from Ferus what had been taken from him, and it says he had vanquished his enemy and brought him down. And to him, it felt so easy, and he felt so satisfied. But his nights are still not easy, and then of course the Emperor Septim pardoned Ferus and given him a new assignment. Vader still doesn't know why. He wonders if it's a test for him, Ferus being a puppet in his master's hands. But we learn that Ferus's release had enraged him, and that had helped him restore back his balance. He's more in control now. He's no longer in his he's no longer stuck with his thinking on the past, except for the nights. But now he has to focus on the moment, and he watches an arbor descend their ramp, and she still has the same, as it says, the same brutal vitality she had when he'd known her before. Now he had tracked her through the galaxy and caught her back when he was a Jedi, but he wasn't but she wouldn't recognise him now. And we learn that he doesn't want to think of Obi-Wan or Anakin, and he couldn't function if this woman reminded him of his past, and he thinks he'll have to send her away if he has to, because no matter how much he needs it, he'd have to send her away if he kept reminding him of his past, because he just can't function if he's being reminded of his past. And it says, with an effort of will, he chases the ghosts of his past away, and Jenna immediately starts Ryan saying, Lord Vader, I didn't realise I had the honour of your personal reception. I would have emerged sooner. And Vader completely sees through it and says, do not start our acquaintance with a lie. And she's taken a bit aback and then smiles and says that I made you wait to establish power. And she says it's something she's in the habit of doing, and that from now on, let's agree to be that they should agree to be a bit more honest in their dealings. That's more efficient. Vader says precisely, but he knows she's going to lie anyway, and they'll just have to work in the fiction that they trust each other. And they go to Vader's private office. And it says that which was constantly monitored for bugging devices. No one could ever find out what it was about to do. And Jenna starts talking about how she knows the Empire's interest is in the weapon delivery systems on a massive scale, and it's not her area of expertise. And Vader interrupts her, saying that's not why she's here. And she asks what the reason is, and Vader says that rumours have reached him about the new drug that she's working on, and that she's close to perfecting an agent that can target specific areas of the brain. And Jenna says, yes, it's a memory agent, and it can scan for memories and erase specific areas. And she says it's related to time. In other words, I should be able to blot out a week or a month or even years if need be. And she says that she's discovered that there are timelines in the brain, and timelines that can be mapped, and it's very technical. Vader asks if she's tested it on humans, and she says that she's only tested it on a few because it's difficult to get human subjects, and that's why she requested the Emperor for prisoners, to bring her prisoners. And Vader says he can obtain the subjects, and that's not a problem, and he can provide her funding and technical help. And Jenna explains that it's not that they get human subjects. Yes, she needs them, but not. She can't just have anyone. Because to be able to pinpoint timelines can be confusing if there's too much expertise, and she says that in these early stages she needs to start on more impressionable subjects with limited experience. And Vader goes, I see, I can arrange that, and he says, and in return, and he makes her wait a little bit, gives her a bit of anticipation, and he says that that she must of course sign away all the rights to the procedure, ceding them to the Empire. And Vader is able to predict her reaction when she says that she'll never sign over the rights to her work and it's her integrity. And Vader says that he must insist, and he says, aside from the benefits of not turning down a request from the Empire, and he lets that sink in for a moment. He says, we can work out the necessary financial arrangements so that you will reap the benefits if the procedure is successful. We are less interested in profits than the use of your discovery. And of course, Jenna's just interested in profit. As long as it's a guaranteed profit, she would sign over anything. And she says, assuming we can come to a financial agreement, there are some things she'd want. And she says an apartment in Republica 500 Tower, which is very difficult to get. Vader says done. And Jenna starts pushing it, saying, on the high floor, she wants a personal introduction to Wraith Senar and a starship designed by him, retrofitted to her personal specifications, paid for by the Empire. And Vader says, agreed. And she requests a high-level security pass, so that she doesn't have to stop for security checks anywhere in the galaxy, given it's so good time consuming. And Vader tells her, agreed. And she looks a bit startled at that, given that's a right, the security pass, that's a right only given to the highest of high people in the Empire, such as Vader himself, or Moff Tarkin, which we're told is soon to be Grand Moff. And she looks startled and then a bit crafty, and how easily Vader had accepted her requests without protest. And she's trying to think of more things to ask, and Vader says, so we have a deal, well, not to go on. And she says, pending the financial agreement, yes. And Vader relaxes a bit, because we learn why he wants to do this, why he wants it. He wants to erase his memories of Padme and Anakin, and he can then function without having to be reminded of them. And when his master would bring up his past, which he sometimes did, they would just be meaningless to him. And he thinks, Padme, you will just be a name to me, nothing more, and that is all you deserve because of your betrayal. Again, he's still under the impression she betrayed him. And he brings his attention back to San Arbor and tells her that she's arranged for her to have an assistant, Lina Nautri, and he explains she's had some of the best, that she's trained at the best scientific institutes and has extensive experience in neural studies. And he tells her that they can work on that at the Imperial labs together on Coruscant. Jenna asks about the human subjects, and Vader says that he will send them shortly. It's quite sad, really, with Vader, because again, we all know about his relation with Padme. And I think a lot of us forget just how he feels about how the last time he met Padme was, he was under the impression that she brought Obi-Wan to kill him. And that he was under the impression that she had betrayed him. That he did all this and wasted it on Padme. And I think we often forget that. And so I think this is quite an interesting different take on that, and continuing that storyline, which is something I wasn't expecting, but it's quite an interesting progression of the storyline that is something that I think a lot of us would think, oh no, Vader wouldn't be, he would want to remember Padme and stuff, but again, in the context of, keep in mind, it's Vader about 7 months after Revenge of the Sith. He's still fresh Vader, he's wanting to vanquish everything. He can't, and he's struggling to function when his past gets continually mentioned. It's a very interesting look and a very unique look into Vader, and it's something that I haven't really seen done before with Vader. A lot of the time when Padme is brought up with Vader, it's usually done to make him more sympathetic. Here it's in a tragic way, and it's in keeping in line with what was, established in Revenge of the Sith. He was under the impression Padme betrayed him. He's still under that impression. And that's an interesting progression that I haven't seen get done before. So that's quite an interesting thing. As for the drug, I think that's quite an interesting thing in itself. The thing is with Star Wars, it's still is grounded in technical stuff. It's realistic with a few fantastical elements like the Force. That's what it's like a futuristic, realistic thing with fantastical elements such as the Force. So when stuff like the memory drug comes in, it can feel a bit jarring. I know when I was watching the Ewok films last year, it was a little bit jarring watching Caravan of Courage with the magical sticks and stuff. That was a little bit jarring, because it's this doesn't quite feel Star Warsy. It feels more like a more typical magical film, but it's one of those things where it can be where I can get behind it, and it kind of puts into perspective just how futuristic Star Wars is, because I think sometimes we get caught up in the concept of futuristic and don't really pay too much attention to just how futuristic some of the things can get. And I think that's one of the things in here. here with the memory drug. The what was it? What did Jenna? I keep saying Jenna. It's Jenna. What did she refer to it as? If I can find it. Yeah, the memory agent. So you know that's quite an interesting thing. So yeah, I'm going to be interested to see where that storyline with Vader leads to, because again, that's something that I haven't, that I didn't think of, and that I've seen very few people think of, and I think it's of interesting storyline. And when you think about it, at least from the perspective of a fresh Vader, you know, yeah, that's how he will be thinking at the moment, and it's tragic. It's absolutely tragic. And these books are just so good. They're so good. So yeah. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I have just read chapter 7 of The Last of the Jedi, what was it, Against the Empire? So, this is a rescue mission, and we're told that, the volunteers from the 11 had set up shifts and worked through 2 nights on the tunnel. And we're told how it was a dangerous job as the Imperial patrols moved around the Moonstone Lake district in random patterns and random patterns and times. And we were told that the cold lake water required special suits, and the volunteers had to stay underwater for long periods of time. And in the end, they couldn't guarantee that the tunnel would be completely watertight, and but they were able to add enough meters to get close to the hangar where they're going to rescue Amy. Solus, Rygal and Clive find the entrance hidden in the rocks alongside the their little hologram portal things. It says holographic portal, but you know, it's like a hologram hiding the entrance. That's what I assume it is. That's what I get the impression of. And as Clive goes in, then they wind up having to crawl through a tunnel in mud. And Clive says, "This is fun," and his wrist is deep in mud as he's moving along, and he says, "Remind me to thank Ferus for this." And right now, of course, it says absolutely nothing. He's the silent type. And despite his size, despite being quite tall, he's moving with a lot of grace, and he's moving surprisingly well. And Solus is already 20 metres ahead, and Clive starts contemplating. He wonders why he's going through slogging through mud underneath a half-frozen lake, and that's what he's wondering. Because he's no Jedi, and he doesn't have the mind. And he says he doesn't have the mind control to pretend he wasn't in pain. And freezing water drips through the tunnel onto his head and snakes down his back. And he thinks nothing. And we're told he thought nothing could be worse than an Imperial prison. And he thinks, okay, mate, this might be worse. And he's wondering why this is always happening to him. In the Clone Wars, he was determined not to take sides, remain neutral, not get involved. And he rounded up with double agents for the Republic. Being a spy for the Republic, spying for the... He was a spy for the Republic who was spying on the Separatists, but acting as a spy to spy on the Republic. So yeah, he was working for the Republic, but was, you know, it's what Ferus is doing. And we're told that he has at least done that double agent stuff for the credits that he got thrown his way. But here he's just doing it for free. He's involved in helping with the resistance. And it's helping a resistance that's not even his own world, and he's working with 2 Jedi he barely knew of. It says, well, his pal Ferus was off hobnobbing with the Emperor's favourites. And he thinks, and we're told that at first he thought it would be fun to help Ferus. He says it would be a lark, because he had nothing better to do. And he's expected to be hiding out in some cushy joints and waiting out the Empire, giving it had to fall sooner or later. And he thinks, why did he have to get involved in giving it a push? And he thinks how he had actually volunteered for this. And he thinks he would have to revisit his stand on loyalty. And how he owed Ferus a favour, and when he fell in with Ferus, his mates, they're taking him in, so he figures he owed them as well. And he thinks he did, but he wonders just how much, and he wonders if that included getting his, and he wonders if that extended to getting his hands and knees in mud and crawling towards heavily armed stormtroopers, and which was that with every gain in forward movement, the water rose. Soon they were slogging through a half-metre of cold lake, and it was still rising. The plaster above his head was starting to crack. The lake was so large it had tides. Had anyone investigated that? What if the tide came in? With such thoughts for company, Clive was surprised when Solo stopped moving and held up a hand to stop. We're told that she raised her hand up to stop, given that they were at the end of the tunnel at last, and the ceiling's only a few centimetres from Clive said. He's almost threatened if he lays down he'll be underwater. She signals to them that they're at the end of the tunnel, and it says that they're squarely in the Imperial territory and they're right on schedule, and he's told in his experiences the Empire's forces were usually exactly on time. And he touches his utility belts more out of a nervous impulse and habits, because while he isn't the shooting kind of guy, he prefers unusual weapons. He's not the shooting. It says he wasn't the shooting kind of guy. He prefers more unusual weapons. And Rygal and Solos assured him that if everything went according to plan, he wouldn't have to shoot it at all. But in his experience, nothing ever went to plan. At least not fully. And his teeth begin to shatter and he has to stop them. And he says sometimes, and he thinks sometimes being brave was just doing what you said you do. And Solus holds up 5 fingers for the countdown. And because Ami's emerged and they're leading her to the transport, and you can't see a thing except the gleam of Solus's fingers and the blackness beyond, and she counts down on her fingers, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. And Rygal and Solus move out incredibly fast, and once he emerges and starts running across the beach, he can barely see Solus and Rygal, who are fighting off the stormtroopers. He doubts the stormtroopers saw them as they were making their advance, because they were so quiet and fast, he could barely see them. They wind up expertly taking out, I think it was like 2 squads or so, and they made it look easy. And besides, our Rygal would use the force to push away an entire line of stormtroopers, and you couldn't see Solus, just a tracing of light. And as he's running over, he's running out of breath, and his lungs are aching, and all he can hear is his panting breath. And we're told that he had seen Ferus use a lightsaber, but he felt a fresh sense of amazement at seeing Solus and Rygal moving pretty much moving in perfect coordination. Given Rygal, and given they very rarely have a conversation, very rarely that it says they strung a sentence together, he thinks now they knew how to communicate, and it was 2 squads, and it says they made taking down 2 squads armed with blasters and grenades look easy. And it's also fast and he's falling behind, but he knows he can't wait, and Ami's in danger, and Ami was being knocked to the floor was getting dragged up again by stormtroopers, and she was faking her weakness, and she's dived behind the ramp of the starship that's going to take her, and that's intended to take her. And Clive falls for his blaster, and he's able to get it, and he dives underneath the ramp opposite her, and he tells her that she's supposed to come with him, and this is the hard part, trust in the Jedi, because they told him he needed to run and not to think about the blasters coming at his back and they'd protect him, and he just needs to take Amy and go. And he thought, this is the hard part for Clive, because he wasn't good at trusting someone to watch his back. You know, he prefers to do that himself. But Amy doesn't seem to have the same problem. She nods and they run. And they're almost at the end of the permacrete when the security light starts turning on. And then they hear the rapid fire of an E-Web repeating blaster, and we're told that's something you definitely don't want to hear at your back. And he tells Amy to jump, and they jump down the slope down to the beach where they had emerged from. And they race along the beach, and he knows at any moment there will be searchlights sweeping the beach. But they don't have to go far. As we are told, the 11 have prepared one more surprise. And it's another holographic portal thingy, as it says. And this one's hidden in the rocky hillside that rises up to the cliffs that overlook the lake. And you see Stoner rise from the rocks like a seal, and she beckons to them, and they run over and take cover in there just in time, and they make their way to the top of the cliff. And I'm just going to read out what the escape plan is. Donna's grey hair was plaited down her back. She was dressed as an Usan priest, the ones who brought bodies to burial, and drove white carts pulled by native beasts called ahunas. Amy let out a choked laugh. "This is my escape, being dead." One of them, I assume Clive, but maybe it's Stoner, says, "You arguing, go!" And Amy slips into the white cart with flowers, and Donor collapses down the boards, and that covers the open back, and she begins to drive the Ahuna forwards with them, and it makes crooning noises that sound like singing. And then Clive runs along the permacrete, where it's told his lungs are on fire, and he has to loop around through a wooded area into the main road of the Moonstone district, and then we're told he walked the routes yesterday, and if everything went according to plan, he'd find another member of the 11 waiting for him. And we're told that they had all pitched in. Amy would be transferred from hand to hand, from cart to speeder to grav sled, and the Jedi would follow. And as Amy would approach the safe house, the helpers would drop away until only the original team was left. So that's just Clive. What was it? Clive, Solus and Mygal, maybe Donor as well. And we're told that there are multiple checkpoints that they have to pass through, diversions to stage, and it isn't over yet. There's sure the alarms are going off at the Imperial garrisons, and we're told how Amy's free, but she isn't safe yet, and they still have a long way to go. First off, Clive, his little ramblings, his little pity me ramblings in a way. That's kind of a joyful thing about Clive, he just doesn't want to get involved. He just wants to, casually get about with life, and he just gets involved with stuff, and it's quite funny to see Harry's thinking, why is it always me? I think the plan, as explained a little bit later on, as to how I'll have to transfer Amy, sounds a bit confusing. And I think at times, crawling through the tunnel sounded a bit confusing, because they were talking about wood and then how they were getting deeper in the water, and it's like, hey! And how if Clive went fully laid down, you'd be underneath the water, and it's like, what? Just since when did they get under the water? They were just in a tunnel a moment ago, so it is a little bit confusing. At times, not massively confusing. It doesn't massively matter, but it does get a little bit confusing. It's like, hey. So yeah, but that's just how I felt. again, the escape plan with Amy having to pretend to be dead and Dona being a priest, that's quite funny. And especially Ami's remark of being, this is my escape being dead. Um, it's quite a crafty plan. So yeah. Next chapter seems to be focusing on Trevor, finally. You know, let's see just how... Okay, I guess 2 minutes on Coruscant amounts to 2 days on Banasa. Because it seems to be the piloting class, and Trevor was due in about 2.5 minutes or so. So it's been 2 days now, so it's like, or maybe it took place in the future. Maybe it took place in the future. We don't know. Trevor, the first chapter, the Trevor chapter. But yeah, it's gonna be. I feel like this book's moving quite fast. You know, we kind of had all the setup chapters with 1 to 6, and now we're on to 7, and it feels like we've already have had a chapter that feels like it should be at toward the end of the book, you know, with freeing Amy. So that's quite interesting. So this book really feels like it's moving a lot. I'm going to be interested to see Hydra's involvement. Again, you know me, I like my Inquisitors. So Hydra is going to be quite interesting. Looking through some of the chapters at the moment. Just to see whether... Never mind. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what these pilot classes will end up being, and how hopefully Loon doesn't blow it for Trevor, you know. Hopefully he's smart enough to just keep quiet. Funnily enough, I think it was in like one of the Essential Guides books. There's an image of Trevor and Loon doing the in the piloting sit test, and I cannot tell you who is who in that image. I'm gonna have to wait and see to what it says it is, to what positions they're in the book. But yeah, I cannot tell you who is who, and if I think it's Trevor behind Loon. But because it looks a bit more like Trevor. But if Loon's in front, he looks way older than 8. He looks 13, 14 than 8, rather than 8. So yeah, it's a bit. But anyway, I think that's going to bring an end to this review. I don't really have anything else to say. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and you know what I'm going to say. Goodbye. Hello, I've just read Chapter 8 of The Last of the Jedi Against the Empire. So we're pretty much picking up with Trevor where we last left off with him in Chapter 1. And he's slowly making his way to the piloting class. And as it turns out, there were maps in essential kiosks throughout the complex, which, again, nobody told him about because he wanted to find stuff out for himself. And each map only gives a small portion of the complex, so he has no idea where he's going still. He's not quite sure if he's in the right direction. And we're told that they didn't care about maps, but they managed to hang huge laser signs reading safety, security, justice, peace in every major hallway. And hollow projections of the Emperor back before he was all hideous and scarred. And we were told how he hates his school now. It's designed to humiliate and control, and we were told, of course it is, because again they want to mould the students into evil-doing Imperials, and he makes it with the class with seconds to spare, and Kestrel is there, and he's meant to be his advisor, but he's certain he'll be his tormentor. And he stands at the front speaking with, and Kestrel's at the front speaking with the instructor, and the instructor is Lieutenant Maggis, and Trevor is just thinking, thanks for the directions, sir, because he asked Maggis for directions, and he says, do I look like an air traffic droid? And Kestrel sees Trevor, makes his way to him, and tells him that 15D grades on your first day, not a stellar start, and Trevor says, well, I'm not worried, and Kestrel puts his hand on his fake blaster and says, you should be, I might decide to give you another. And Trevor's about to blow everything, he's about to stand up for himself when he sees Loon, and he gets his self-control back, and he thinks about Ferus in enemy territory and how much he must have to exercise self-control just to make it through a single day. And we're told that again Loon is much younger than Trevor, and he was so surprised to see him in the same class as him, but again he's 8 years old, Trevor's 13, but he thinks he should have guessed that the kid's force abilities would have allowed him to get into advanced piloting so soon. And Maggie calls the class to order, and Trevor moves towards Loon, and Loon hasn't seen him yet, and he doesn't want to surprise him or have him call out. But it's Loon who surprises Trevor, and we're told, of course it is. It was close to spooky the way he could tell when someone was behind him, and we're told how Garamulin had him work on awareness tactics back when they were on the asteroid. And we again reminded how Garen's practically a ghost now and very weak, and his powers are diminished, but he was still a good teacher. And Trevor wants to think this awareness tactics is just a whole bunch of Jedi mumba humba, as it says, but it does seem to work. And Loon says to Trevor to tell his mother that he's okay. Ferus and Trevor says that you can tell her herself, I'm getting you out of here. And Loon lifts the shoulder slightly to tell him good luck on that, and Maggie starts saying, today, you worthless lunkheads, we're going to move on up to flight simulation. Note the keyword simulation. I wouldn't trust a lot of you to pilot me around a space park. Now pick a partner and decide who will be a pilot and co-pilots without shooting each other, and we'll begin. And we're told it's lucky that Trevor and Loon were together, standing next together, and as the new recruits, it's natural they would partner up. And they make their way to one of the flight simulators, and Loon explains that he's being spied on by Kestrel and his mate Flynn. And he says that he's never alone, and he's sure they're reporting to Maggis. He says he's got special handlers, and Trevor says that's not a problem, he's gotten out of worse places, and he's not entirely sure if that is true. He's not sure if he's gotten out of worse places than this, but he thinks it sounds good. And Loon takes the pilot's seat, so it is Loon in front of that image, and Trevor gets into the co-pilot's seat, and the simulation turns on, and Maggis explains that they're in the middle of a battle, and red against blue, and he says that pilots fly, co-pilots engage the enemy. And Maggis explains visual sightings only, and no targeting computers in this exercise. And Trevor says this should be fun, and he turns his laser cannons to fire on the blue guys, and Loon shouts, "Trevor, we blue! Shoot at the red guys!" And Trevor goes, "Oops!" And he swings the cannons back around to a red ship on the monitor, and he squeezes the trigger, and the ship explodes on screen. And he says, I am one full moon amazing shot," and Loon says, "Watch out, Captain Amazing, there's one coming up on our left." And they continue through the program, and they make it to the last two lasting. I assume it was like half the students against the other half. I'm not sure, it doesn't make it very clear. And and we're told that Kestrel and his partner Flynn, alongside Trevor and Loon, are the only ones left as they make their way to the end. And Loon says to Trevor that he thinks they should let them win, and they don't want to attract too much attention. And Trevor shoots a look at Loon. He says, "We could just win and drive Kestrel crazy." And Loon grins, and we're told how Kestrel's a good pilot, but Loon is better. And they pull off, and Kestrel accidentally bumps into an oncoming asteroid, and Loon says he's going to have control problems, and he's going to go in. He tells Trevor to get ready. And we're told Loon, and it says Loon was calm as he swept the ship into an arc. Then he suddenly heeled to the right and dived. "I'll tell you when to shoot." Trevor would have been annoyed, but he knew Loon's skill was greater than his own. "Now, starboard guns." Trevor shot starboard laser cannons, and Loon made a sharp starboard turn. It seemed simultaneous, which would make the aim go awry, but it was a split second before, and the aim was true. Kestrel was already firing at them, where the fire streaked across open space. Trevor's shot went home. Kestrel's ship exploded. And Trevor gives out a whoop of joy, a whoop of pure joy, and the class cheers and jeers, depending on their loyalties, given Kestrel has some supporters, but most of the younger recruits were rooting for Loon and Trevor. And they come out of the cockpit simulator, and Kestrel is furious with his neck going bright red, and Trevor thinks, "Oops, squawk, ruby-throated Keat." And Maggis calls for attention, and he says that this is the worst. This is the most pathetic display he's ever seen, and he's seen toddlers in nurseries do a better job at throwing blocks with more accuracy. And he says he should all be flunked out today. And he says that Davinian was the only one to show any skill whatsoever. And he says to Trevor, "Fortin, you get a failing grade." And Trevor says, "But he blasted Kestrel out the sky." And Maggie says that he heard that yell and he showed emotion, and that's against Imperial rules. And he says, "Do that in the cockpit again, and he'll be eating slop in the mining corps." And Kestrel smirks over at Trevor, and Maggie says, "Tomorrow we take a look at some real starships in the hangar. So once you up on your manuals, strain your puny brains." "Class dismissed. In other words, get out of my sight." And everyone starts leaving the simulation room, and Kestrel and his mates Flynn, Flinn, sweep up behind Loon and Trevor, and Kestrel tells him he's going down. Says to Trevor he's going down, and Loon says seems like you're the one who just got flames out. And Flynn tells Loon that he shouldn't be making friends with Fortin being Trevor. And he says he's not going to last long, and pretty soon he'll be a drone worker on a mining planet. And Trevor says, "Maybe, but I know for one thing for sure, we just outflew you, outgunned you, and outclassed you." And Kestrel opens his mouth angrily, but just then they pass under the gaze of Maggis, who's standing at the door, with his arms folded, and he looks at them from under his heavy black eyebrows. And Trevor says to Loon that it probably wasn't the best move, and it was the stupidest thing they could have done. And Loon says, "Yeah, but it sure felt good." And Trevor looks back, and Maggis is still looking at them. And Trevor says he better take off. They don't want to be seen with each other, and you'll find Loon when he has a plan. And Loon says he already has a plan, and to meet him in the Commons room an hour after lights down tonight. And that's where we end off the chapter. Next chapter seems to be focusing on Ferus. But anyway, this is quite a fun chapter. I'm glad that Loon was a bit more sensible. I'm glad he was sensible, and he didn't blurts called out for Trevor, or, you know, shout out that, or look surprised, anything that would give him away, you know. I'm glad he was sensible. Because that was one of the things, is this about to go wrong? But no, he was sensible, Again, Trevor, it was quite... It was a lot of joy this chapter. It was a lot of joy this chapter, and Trevor was especially quite funny as well. Especially with aiming at the blues, and Trevor, we're blue. Oh, he could have maybe told Loon his name, his alias. Sorry, that being Thornton. You know, just to make sure it's right. Because Maggie sees the whoop of joy. Maybe he'll hear Loon call Trevor, and give away his actual identity. Oops. Again, Kestrel. Trevor's remark as Kestrel was coming out of the simulator there, it was, oops, squawk, ruby throated Keats. That had me laughing for a little bit. But yeah, this chapter was quite joyous actually, and poor Magus. It had to, like, you could have at least told Trevor where you were going, you know. At least you could have told him where you were going. It wasn't, not poor Magus, poor Trevor. You know, Magus could have at least told him where he was going. If you're the instructor, should you be at least telling him where he's going? If he's going to be at your class. But, yeah. I think that brings an end to this review. I'm not sure how much else I have to say on this chapter, honestly, because I don't have a whole lot to say. We've got there's lots of moving pieces, you know. We've got Amy Anton, who's just been freed, but still needs to get to the safe house. We got Ferus, who's heading to Coruscant to meet with Hydra, and also has got Mallory Lone's cousin, to take that job at MPOW because of something relating to Vader with his prosthetics and cybernetics. You got Vader with the memory drug, the memory agent, who's wanting to erase his memories of being Anakin and Padme. So there's a lot of moving pieces. Here. And we still haven't caught up with Keats or Dex or Curran or Astri, you know, so yeah. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where all this goes and what Loon's plan is. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye.